Have you ever stopped to wonder who really calls the shots in the global economy? It's a huge question. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the powerful and, let's be honest, often invisible institutions that are writing the rulebook for international trade. We're going to look at who holds the power, who they answer to, and how all their big decisions actually end up shaping our day-to-day lives. So, let's start with that big question. Who is writing these rules? For, centuries, the answer was pretty simple. It was governments. But in the world we live in today, this hyper-connected, fast-moving world, that old rulebook has basically been torn up and rewritten. There's a whole new cast of characters, these powerful international players who've stepped onto the stage. And believe me, they are changing the game completely.
And what's the engine driving this massive shift? Well, it's that word we hear all the time, globalization. But it's so much more than just a buzzword, right? It's really about the deep integration of all these different economies, and it's all powered by global trade and incredible leaps in technology. You can almost think of it as the world transforming into one giant, interconnected global village.
So here's our roadmap for today. First up, we're going to tackle the World Trade Organization, the supposed referee of global trade. Then we'll meet the so-called global bankers, the IMF and the World Bank. We're also going to uncover some of the more hidden architects shaping our economy. And we're going to end with a pretty surprising twist on what the role of the modern state actually is.
Okay, let's kick things off with the big one, the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. This is pretty much the central hub for regulating global trade, but its role, well, it's fiercely debated. Is it a fair umpire for everybody, or is it, playing favorites? Now, the WTO didn't just appear out of thin air. It actually grew out of an agreement from way back in the 1940s called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT for short. But by 1995, the global economy was way more complex, and the world needed something bigger, something with more teeth. So the WTO was born, and it had this really ambitious mission to oversee and expand free trade on a truly global scale.
And the promise of the WTO is, it's huge. It's designed to be this one-stop shop for all the rules of global trade. It manages everything from labor rights to environmental standards. The core idea here is to create a level playing field, a place where every country that's a member has a fair shot at succeeding. But not everyone is buying that promise, not by a long shot. For its critics, especially folks in the anti-globalization movement, the WTO is something else entirely. They see it as a tool of the rich and powerful. They argue it's less about fair play and way more about just protecting the interests of wealthy nations and these giant megacorporations.
And this isn't just some academic debate, This tension literally exploded onto the world stage back in 1999 at the WTO summit in Seattle. Protesters flooded the streets, and they were accusing the organization of putting corporate profits way ahead of people and the planet. It was a massive flashpoint.
All right, next up, let's talk about the global bankers, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank. And just like the WTO, they bring up a really crucial question. Are they actually helping the world, or are they holding it back?
So their official job, their mission, is to keep the global economy stable. But their influence, it goes way, way beyond that. These two institutions have become so powerful that they've essentially taken over economic powers that used to belong only to national governments. That is a massive shift in the global balance of power.
But this is where things get really controversial. One of their most potent tools is something called a Structural Adjustment Program, or SAP. So here's the deal with how it works. They offer financial aid to a developing nation. But, and this is a big but, it comes with some serious strings attached. We're talking strict conditions that can completely reshape a country's entire economic and political landscape.
And this slide really captures the whole debate perfectly. On the one hand, you have the stated goal, which is all about aid and development. But critics, they see it in a completely different light. They argue these programs are just forcing a single industrialized model onto all these diverse nations. And they call it a modern form of informal imperialism, where the richer northern countries keep their control over the southern ones.
Now, beyond these massive, well-known institutions, there are other, less visible players that are busy shaping the global economy. So let's pull back the curtain on two of the most powerful ones, the G7 and transnational corporations.
The G7 is basically the ultimate power players club of the world's biggest economies. Now, it's not a formal organization with a big headquarters or anything, but don't let that fool you. Its influence is absolutely massive. The
The G7 coordinates economic policy among its members, and they often end up setting the entire agenda that bigger organizations like the WTO will later adopt.
Okay, now for the real engines of globalization. Transnational corporations, or TNCs. We hear it all the time, right? That these corporate giants have become even more powerful than countries themselves, that they operate beyond the reach of any single government. But is that really the whole story?
Well, the reality is a whole lot more complicated. Far from being these totally separate rivals, states and TNCs are often partners. I mean, look at France. The government there directly controls corporations like Renault. Or in Singapore, the lines between government and big business are super blurry. That supposed divide between the state and the corporation, yeah, a lot of the time it's just an illusion.
And that brings us to our final and maybe our most important section today. In this age of giant global institutions and massive corporations, what has happened to the good old nation-state?
We've seen how these big global organizations have taken on powers that used to belong to governments. So this is really the million-dollar question, isn't it? Has globalization made the nation-state irrelevant?
And the answer, maybe surprisingly, is a very powerful no. The truth is, states aren't the victims of globalization. They are its architects. This is the absolute core of what academics call the transformationalist view of globalization.
I mean, just think about the WTO again. It feels like this power that exists above nations. But what is it really? It's an organization of nations. It was created by states, it is run by states, and its rules only have power because states agree to follow them.
And it's the exact same story for the United Nations. At its very heart, it is a collection, a gathering of individual nation-states. So, far from being pushed to the sidelines, nations are the ones who are actively building and shaping our entire global system.
So all of this leaves us with one final and kind of nagging question. If nation-states are the ones building these incredibly powerful global institutions, then in a world that's run by these new rules, who exactly is governing the governors?